Is there room for randomness in competitive games? Well, to answer that question, we first must examine what randomness does to games in general. The appeal of randomness in gaming exists because of the dynamic gameplay it can provide. For example, a common asset to roguelikes is their tendency to develop a new game on each playthrough. This occurs by the game giving players randomly selected items or procedurally generating new stages and maps. What some may not know is that true randomness doesn't exist. When a game produces a random element, it doesn't pull a number from nowhere. Instead, it has an algorithm that outputs a string of digits that appears to have no pattern, calling upon these digits whenever a random event can occur. We call this RNG. While RNG isn't truly random, it's not something that players can calculate and understand in real time. We can't factor out the details of how RNG works, so for us, it's so close to being random that it might as well be random. Randomness keeps gameplay varied in all sorts of ways. Like I just said, roguelikes allow for dynamic gameplay by randomly differentiating experiences on each playthrough. Of course, though, randomness isn't restricted to roguelikes. Consider Pokemon battles. Every time you attack, there's a small chance that the move will deal extra damage, a critical hit. This is determined based on RNG. This also comes up in other places in Pokemon, such as whether a move hits or misses. Sometimes it can be frustrating, especially in the metagame, but the randomness in Pokemon allows for more varied gameplay so that the fights stay interesting and so that there's always that small chance for a comeback. Because of this, randomness is appreciated in competitive games, because it allows you to... There's random tripping in Brawl right behind me right now, isn't there? Okay, perhaps randomness isn't quite appreciated in competitive games. In Super Smash Bros. Brawl, there's a 1% chance whenever you input a horizontal direction that you'll inexplicably trip over, halting all movement momentarily and killing player momentum. This hate for Brawl's tripping has led some to dismiss Brawl as a competitive title, fixating only on the installments before and after it. But even if we don't look at Brawl and its tripping, competitive Smash players still eliminate items and even some stages from tournament play, likely to remove any other random elements from fights. While critical hits and other RNG-based components are decently accepted in the competitive metagame of Pokemon, it's met with a passionate disdain in the competitive scene of Smash. What's with that? Well, there's probably a multitude of reasons behind this. For one thing, it's easier to react and adapt to random elements in a turn-based game as opposed to a real-time one. A bigger reason is likely how the randomness was introduced. Pokemon has had critical hits and the chance to miss since their first installments. Brawl, on the other hand, was the first and only game in the Smash Bros. Series to feature random tripping. Super Smash Bros. Melee already had a large competitive scene, and the creation of such an influential change in Brawl was unwelcomed by players. But when it really comes down to it, the reason for the varied feelings between games relates to how much the players control what's going on in the game. This is probably a weird question, but is there a competitive scene for Mario Party? If it does exist, it's clearly not a very large community, at least compared to the competitive scenes for Pokemon and Smash. This is likely because Mario Party is such an intrinsically random game. Even the best player in the world could suddenly lose everything in one turn if a player lands on a special space on the board. Too little is in the player's control for it to be considered a viably competitive game. Let's take a look at another competitive game, Rocket League. This game doesn't have a great deal of randomness to it. However, it can be hard to hit the ball exactly the way you want it to every time. This is because doing so requires very precise velocity upon hitting the ball, which has a dynamic placement determined by factors outside the player's control, those factors being other players. While it isn't technically random, there are so many factors involved it can be hard for the player to constantly keep track of where the ball will be, so from the perspective of the players, it might as well be random, just like RNG. In this way, simply having other players in competitive games gives them a sort of random element outside the player's control. Looking back at Smash, we can see that nearly all random elements in the game have been eliminated by players via the exclusion of items in certain stages. Looking at Pokemon, we also see a certain degree of control. Critical hit chance can be manipulated by items and attacks. Players also sometimes have the option of picking moves with higher accuracy to ensure lower miss chance. In addition to the amount of pre-control that goes into fights, control and awareness also exist during the fight. Pokemon players know all the chances they're getting themselves into when they attack with a low accuracy move, and they always know there's a chance of a critical hit with each attack. This can be taken into account whenever they take action in the game. In Smash, there are tons of dynamics that play into items. Where they spawn, who uses them, when and where they're used, and with Smash being a fast-paced game played in real time, there's so little time to comprehend it all. Having so many of these factors outside of the player's control greatly increases their impact on the game. Just like where the ball is going to be in Rocket League, it's something players can't always be aware of at all times. Players have to accept that some things will always be outside of their immediate control. For all these reasons, it makes sense that various random elements in Smash are much less accepted than they are in Pokemon. Essentially, true randomness doesn't really exist in gaming. It's all a matter of player control. This is something that needs to be taken into account in competitively driven games. The battle of luck versus skill is one that's been going on for a long time and likely always will be. To make a competitive game that can be considered fair by all players requires that random elements aren't too far outside of the player's control and awareness. Having potentially measurable factors allows luck-based elements to become skill-based elements as long as they're sufficiently predictable and the players can manage the impact of any outcomes. Sometimes, however, these mechanics exist far outside the realm of any potential human understanding, but this isn't a bad thing. It allows for varied gameplay and varied skill levels among players no matter how many random elements the game features. Having a skill ceiling that's beyond human potential allows players to grow in skill and compete almost indefinitely. Ultimately, competitive games will favor skill over chance, but there will always be room for that one risky coin flip. But even among the biggest gaming leagues in the world, they have yet to ban the most dangerous source of randomness there is: your opponent. Tired of my voice? If not, you should totally subscribe and check out more videos like the ones on screen. If you are tired of my voice, check out What's With Games on Facebook and Twitter. You don't have to hear my voice on those.